Welcome to the Biblical Languages Podcast, brought to you by Biblingo. I am Kevin Grosso, your host for this episode, and I'm excited to talk with my old teacher, Christophe Rico, today about second language acquisition and the Polis Method. Welcome to the show, Christophe.
Welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's great to have you. So I think the first thing that people would want to know, especially if they haven't really heard of what you're doing in Jerusalem, is what is the Polis Institute?
Okay, Polis Institute is an institute based in Jerusalem, in a very interesting place because it's located between. It's almost in the east, but yet it is in the west, in West Jerusalem. So it's the last street of West Jerusalem. So in a very inclusive place, if I can say. And also located 300 meters from the old city, perhaps even less. So very, very central and really like a meeting point between East and West. So the Polis Institute is an institute that started 10 years ago as a place where we would make research and teaching on ancient and modern languages, but especially on ancient languages in order to make people easier their access to the foundational texts that are at the base of our civilization. So the main problem that we see is that many times you have people who want to understand the Bible, to understand the ancient text, to understand the text of the main philosophers or the main historians or the main thinkers of antiquity and Middle Ages, and they are not able. Why? Because we have very few translations. In fact, if we take all what has been written in Greek and Latin from antiquity till the end of the Middle Ages, I would say that 95% has never been translated into any language. So that's a big problem because first of all, we rely upon translations. Many times, not everything is translated in English, and many times there are no translations at all. So either you know Latin and Greek, or you cannot have access to the text. In fact, the idea of the Polis Institute is not just languages, is to renew humanities, all branches of humanities, through a deeper knowledge of ancient languages. And this is why the Polis Institute has started around a method to teach ancient and modern languages in a more efficient way. So the idea is that someone, after 3 months studying at Polis, would be able to hold a conversation in ancient Greek. And then after 9 months studying at Polis, he or she would be able to read the Gospels in Greek without translation, without dictionary. And after 2 years, that person would be able to read some easy dialogues of Plato or some easy stuff in Attic. The same could be said for any other language if there is the proper immersion. And this is possible if enough hours are devoted to that immersion and if it is really full immersion from the very beginning. That means that from day one, you only speak the language that is taught in the class and you are only asking questions to the teacher in that language.
Yeah, that's really great. So it's interesting. Just I think the way a lot of people know you is as the people that speak ancient languages, right? But your goal, it sounds like, is much broader. Not just to be able to speak Greek or ancient Greek, but also to be able to renew the humanities by getting back to the languages, that these great thinkers were encapsulated in. Is that kind of a fair summary?
Certainly. I mean, if you have a look at our website, you will see that we have put there some dissertations for our students. And some are devoted to some text of Plato, others to text of Archimedes, of Ephesus, and so on. And then each time you could see how their knowledge, their intimate knowledge of the ancient language helped them renew the look upon the text. So there is always a freshness of knowledge that comes from reading a text directly in the original, and this is something that unfortunately we have lost. So it's very important to get to that knowledge in order to get a fresh view of these texts.
Yeah, that's really great. And something, so I'm a former student at Polis, and something that I can just really attest to, reading the texts again, having learned the language as well, is a very different experience. So I want to, so this is kind of like the why of the Polis Institute, right? Like why you're doing what you do. How did this begin? Can you give us just a brief history on how the Polis Institute got started?
Yeah, well, first, back in 2001, so well before we started the Polis Institute, I started teaching ancient Greek in ancient Greek. So for me, it was a challenge because up till then, I had always taught ancient Greek in French, which is my mother tongue. And I had never done it through full immersion. But once I had a group of students who told me, Jess, please try to teach us just in ancient Greek. So I tried the experience. So for me, it was really very challenging because I had to learn myself ancient Greek. So I felt that I needed the imperatives. And especially the aorist imperatives that are the most common ones when you start speaking. And I noticed that I didn't have that. So I had to learn them in order to be able to speak. So get out, come here, come to the blackboard, write your name upon the blackboard, and so on. And little by little, I developed my knowledge of ancient Greek, and for me, it was really something that helped me because up till then I was only able to read in Greek directly without translation and without dictionary, only the New Testament and very few other things. Now I'm able to read many things directly in the original, but it is because I have experienced the fact of speaking the language. You cannot really read a language with some fluency, or at least let us say that it is very difficult to do it if you don't actually speak the language. So this is why we speak the language. But if you really want to be able to read in the original with some fluency, and when you read the Gospel of John directly in the original without translation, you start reading it in colors instead of reading it in black and white, or reading it I don't know, with like if it were hills and valleys instead of having something flat. I mean, it's the same thing, but much richer, much. I mean, it's an incredible added value to the text. And I mean, I will tell you a simple example. Reading the Gospel of John and trying to translate it into French, I discovered that in the two first chapters of St. John, you have up till 16 different verbs for the idea of to see. But when you take the main English and French translations, you have 4 or 5 or 6 different verbs. So where are the other 10? What happened to them? So it's always to see, to look at, to glance. But I mean, there are many nuances in the original. So those nuances have been lost. And we are talking about the glance that Jesus is having upon the people. So, I mean, it's something important, you see? So this is something that you lose when you don't learn the language through the original. So when you don't learn the language through full immersion in order to be able to speak it and to be able to think within that language. And then you will see the added value of a specific word. And this, the dictionary cannot give it to you, because the dictionaries are alphabetical and they don't give you a domain. But when you learn a language, you learn, for instance, the word theasasai, which is to look at something and to let, like as if you were at the cinema or looking at the scene, you let all what you are looking entering into your vision. But when I see that, I see the difference with respect to the verb idein, which is more neutral word to say to see and so on. So these are the nuances that are really important when I read directly in the original. Okay, I don't know why I was saying all that.
So that's okay. So it's helpful. I mean, I think the point is that your own experience, right, led you to, sort of start to realize how important it is to speak, right?
So that was about the history of the Polis Institute. Yeah. So then afterwards, little by little, I suddenly realized that I didn't know how to teach a modern language or a living language, I would say, because suddenly ancient Greek was a living language. So how to teach a living language? I was not trained for that. So I had to, little by little, read a lot about the different techniques, about the different ways of teaching a modern language in order to apply it to ancient Greek. Then I met Eran Shuali, who was teaching who was very interested in teaching biblical Hebrew in an immersive way. And we started him teaching biblical Hebrew in an immersive way, and me teaching ancient Greek in an immersive way. And we had a lot of conversations. And at one point, we decided that we had to start the Polis Institute. So in the end, Eran and Shuali had to go to France to start a PhD. But we started the Polis Institute with a group of scholars and teachers. And this is how it started.
Yeah, so that's really helpful. So it sounds like basically what started as just an experience for you has really grown now into, publishing books and materials and different programs. I mean, I know you guys have just expanded a lot in the past 10 years. So one thing that I think a lot of people are interested in is how Polis is compares to other programs, specifically BLC. So I know you and Randall was in Randall Booth was in Jerusalem for some time, and you began teaching the biblical languages communicatively. So from what you know of BLC, what makes Polis different or distinctive?
Well, first of all, I have to say that Randall Booth is a very good friend of mine, and I owe him a lot. Why? Because he's the one who introduced me in some of the techniques that now are part of the Polis Method, like the TPR, total physical response. So the fact that you give a command and the person performs it, the student performs it in order to internalize the language. But what I can tell you is what Polis does. So which is the Polis Method. So I would say, first of all, that the Polis Method is a dynamically composite learner-centered method. So it's a learner-centered method. Why? Because the method is focused on the use of language and the needs of its learners. And then it's composite because it comprises a specific set of complementary approaches and strategies that are integrated deliberately into one working system. So I would say that first of all, you have two main principles. The first one is full immersion. So there are many, many other institutions who practice full immersion. It's less common for ancient languages, but it is becoming each time more and more common, even for ancient languages. So ancient languages are becoming alive again. I've recently heard about a website where you had like 1,000 people trying to speak Akkadian. So you see, it's becoming a kind of a trend. And this is new, and it's certainly the digital era makes it possible. And this is happening for Latin, for Greek. Latin has always been spoken, even by very, very few people, but it has always been spoken. There has never been a time where Latin was not spoken. Not within families, as it is happening now. Now we have some families where Latin is spoken. This is completely new. Not many, but there are there is a handful of families in the world where Latin is spoken by the children and the parents and so on. But Latin has always been spoken as an academic language, always. And now it is growing again. And Latin, I would say, is a very young language, as ancient Greek is. So perhaps I and Randall and Luigi Miraglia, we are the old ones who speak ancient Greek, but everybody else is very young. I mean, the average is between 20 and 25. Those are the people who speak ancient Greek. You know, it's a very young language, a language that is growing. I mean, I gave a lecture in ancient Greek in the Pedagogy Institute in February, and there were some 40 people following it up till from the beginning till the end. So the half hour, there were no subtitles. So well, there was a PowerPoint that was just there, but I mean, the PowerPoint was only part of what I was saying, and people were following. 40 people. So just 5 years ago, you would have had less than 10, but 40 people, that's a lot. I mean, I calculate that there might be like 100 people in the world speaking ancient Greek at one level or the other. So the first principle is full immersion. The second principle of the Polis Method is dynamic language development, which means, and that is specific to the Polis Method, which means that there is a natural order in learning a language. It has to do with the natural order. It's not the same exactly, but it has a lot to do with the natural order with which a child learns her or his mother tongue. So you don't start, for instance, learning the present tense, indicative present tense. You don't start like that. First, you learn the imperatives. When you look at the natural order is to start with the imperatives from the point of view of the verbs. Of course, the first thing is the greetings. This is the first thing that you learn in a language. Greetings. Hello, how are you? I'm well. I mean, I was in Morocco when I was a child, and I was exposed till the age of 12 to Arabic, but not learning it formally. And the first thing I learned was the greetings. This is the first thing that you learn. So then immediately the imperatives and the deictics. So the imperatives, then immediately after the imperatives and even before the deictics, you would have the I hear now. So what you would say the shifters in linguistics. This is essential. So perhaps for a child a child has a difficulty in learning the I. He will say his own name, his own personal name first before saying I. But for an adult who already has her or his own mother tongue, the natural order would be to start with the I, here, now, and you, there, then. I mean, you have to situate yourself in the space with the shifters. And then immediately the deictics. What's this? This is that. What's this? This is that. What's that? This is that. So you have a natural order, and that natural order is not grammatical, but rather pragmatic. So there is a difference between grammar and pragmatics. So because grammar is an evolution from pragmatics. Grammar is different from one language to the other. Pragmatics are pretty much the same interlinguistically. Okay, in any language you have commands. Not in all languages you will have imperatives. Imperative is already something which is grammatical, but to have commands, this is something pragmatic. You learn first to give commands. or to understand commands, which is pragmatic. So for any language, we will start with that. And this is part of the Polis method. This is the dynamic language development. Because if you find the right order, it's like an algorithm. If you find the right order, you will learn much quicker. If you are not following the right order, things become extremely more difficult to put in order. So you see, it's like building up a house. Okay? You cannot start with the roof when you build up a language. You have to start with the foundations. And if you start with the foundations, it looks more slower at the beginning. It looks slower at the beginning, but then you go faster. And then you have the techniques. The techniques are that we use in the Polis method are there is only one that we have really developed at the Polis Institute. All the other ones are techniques that have been developed by other people, like TPR, like storytelling, like story building, like working in pair groups or in small groups, like using images and accessories. All these kind of techniques, they are extant. They have been used in the Polis method. We use them according to a specific pattern, according to a specific method. So they have been integrated within a full method. But there is one which is which started as an insight from a French teacher of Latin who was called François Gouin at the end of the 19th century. And he understood that sequentiality was the key to learning languages. And out of these insights, we have developed the LSE, Living Sequential Expression, which is a technique which is really specific to the Polis Institute, to the Polis method, which means that when I learn things, when I learn to speak, I have to learn. One of the first things that you learn, well, first you learn the dialogue. This is the first thing. Even before dialogue, you learn to hear things and to react to the things before being able to respond. Okay? But then immediately the first usage that you have of the language is dialogue. So you have to start with dialogues. This is why when we take, for instance, a method like Orberg for Latin, they don't start by dialogue. So it's an incredible method to learn Latin, but there is something which is lacking there. And it is precisely to start with dialogues. So this is the basis of any study of language. So you start with dialogues, but then immediately afterwards, you have telling. You have to be able to tell something, to tell a story, to tell a joke, to say what you have done this morning, to say what you did yesterday, to tell about a football match, whatever. And then for that, you need living sequential expression, because you will hear commands that are related one to the other. For instance, get up, walk, stop, sit down. This is really related one to the other. And then you will be able to say the same thing. Then you will be able to say what you have done. First, I got up. Then I walked. Then I stopped, then I sat down. And if you learn them according to the order, and you're able to tell them according to the order, it's much easier to memorize them because they are logically connected. So it enhances memory. So that is one really specific technique that has been developed at the Polis Institute within the Polis method.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think that's, for anyone that would want, to know like what makes the Polis Institute different than something like BLC, I think, that would be a distinctive of you guys. It's interesting that you said just about greetings and imperatives. I think, so I have a baby that's just over 10 months old right now, and he's just now, like, he understands bye-bye. But I think the only other word he knows like really well is elfe.
In Greek?
In Greek. Yeah.
Don't tell me that you are talking to him in Greek.
Oh, I'm of course I'm talking to him in Greek. When it's daddy time, it's a lot of Greek. But it's really? Interesting. Yeah, of course.
Don't tell me that he's the first ancient Greek baby boy.
Well, yeah, he won't be exclusively ancient Greek because
Of
we have to
course.
work in biblical Hebrew, of course. But yeah, but
You
it
don't
is
talk to him in
interesting.
English? You don't talk English to him?
No, English. He doesn't really need English. English is not really that important, as far as like world languages go. No, I'm just kidding.
You say it.
Yeah, I know. With that, we have something in common. So so I just going back to the Polis method. I think one so from being in the classroom with you, and just from also I've also taken BLC. So how would you respond? I mean, I think one difference in my own experience is explicit grammar instruction. So the Polis Institute will talk about the infinitive, for example, as a grammatical item in Greek, right? And so it'll all be in Greek, but they will specifically talk about the grammar in Greek. So there are some I know within the communicative world that say, oh, well, grammar should just be learned intuitively and not explicitly. And as long as you just use the forms in the right way, you'll start to just like absorb it, the grammar through just immersion. So how would you respond to someone like that? What do you think are the benefits of, pointing out that this is an infinitive, right? And
I would say first that, of course, if you had the possibility of living for 10 years or 5 years, like a child, only in ancient Greek, but I mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So then you wouldn't need explicit grammar. Also, if really ancient Greek was your mother tongue, it would make it different than learning a second language. So then you would need it. You wouldn't need any explicit grammar because I mean you don't learn explicit grammar and you are able to speak your mother tongue. I mean, there's no need. The problem is that the amount of hours that we have to learn an ancient language, the amount of hours we are exposed to the ancient language is much less than the amount of hours that you're exposed to your mother tongue or even to a foreign tongue that you are going to learn in a foreign country. So you have to make the best of the time you have. And then the question is it possible just to skip the step of explicit grammar? In any case, we never, in the Polis method, we don't start with explicit grammar, never. Mm-hmm. So it starts by intuitive grammar. So it's the same thing as with other methods. You start only with intuitive grammar. So for instance, you hear, let us say in Greek, the thematic aorist. You hear it, you perform it. So el cejode comes here. Then what did you do? And so the student will say, or another student will say, or someone, elthon, I came. Okay, elthes, you came. And then you ask the class, what did he do? Elthe, he came. So you start, and you do that with all the possible verbs that are thematic aorist that can be performed within the class. So the same thing with, I don't know, take, receive, or other verbs. And then once you have done that for half an hour, 40 minutes perhaps, so once in fact the paradigm has been internalized, then you write it on the blackboard, but you write it, you ask them, so ego, ti ego pollo, what do I do? So ego, or what did I do? Elthon. Okay, everybody will say elthon. So I came. And you, elthes, you came. And him or her, elthe. And then you write the paradigm. So the explicit grammar, teaching the explicit grammar is a way to consolidate something that has been learned intuitively. So, but you never start with the step of the grammar, because that's awful. It will never be internalized. The grammar is just there to show something that is already inside. So the grammar is the external thing that shows what is inside. But it is important in order, especially when you go on with a language like Greek, is extremely morphologically very heavily loaded. So it's perhaps one of the most morphologically loaded languages that I know of. So it's really heavy. So the only way to progress is at some stage you need really to how can I put it? You need to make explicit what you already know in order to put some order in your knowledge. But that doesn't mean that you start with that step. It has to be a consequence, not a starting point. This is what I would say.
So yeah, that's really interesting, and I think an important foundational point to that is first language acquisition actually is different than second language acquisition. Like when we're dealing with teaching adults, it is different than when we're teaching a baby. I mean, there are ways in which adults can organize the world right around a paradigm, and that's helpful for them if they can see how the pieces fit together. Whereas a baby, they're not going to have that sort of like ordered, system in their heads, right? So yeah, I think that's a great point.
Hey, this is Nick with Biblingo, and I hope you're enjoying this podcast series on biblical language pedagogy. If you're a teacher, faculty, or a student that would like to see these pedagogical principles implemented at your institution, then we have a special event for you. On May 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we're hosting a webinar called How to Enhance Your Biblical Language Program with Biblingo. We'll show you how you can leverage these proven language learning methods in your biblical language program using the Biblingo software and our supplemental resources. Click the link in the description or go to biblingo.org/webinar to register for the event.
So I want to shift gears a little bit at this point and talk about, I know you mentioned some of this earlier. What would you say to people who just say, hey, I think it's cool to speak Greek, but I just want to read it. And there's a lot of people out there. So we've talked a little bit about the distinctives of the Polis Method and how it differs from other methods out there, but there are some people that just aren't convinced in general that speaking Greek is necessary. So can you tell us maybe a little bit about your own story in this? I know you had mentioned this earlier that once you learned to speak Greek, you were really helped in your reading of the text. But what would you say to people that just say, hey, I can read Greek. I don't need to learn to speak it to read it. And it's kind of a waste of time to learn to speak Greek when that's not really my aim.
So first of all, I would like to see what is amazing is that people who have studied Greek all their life and even taught Greek, they haven't read much in Greek. So the amount of texts that they have read fully in Greek is not extremely, it's not very long. So, I had studied Greek all my life and primarily taught Greek up till the year 2000. And the amount of text that I have fully read in Greek, apart from the New Testament, and translated, in fact, I was translating, was not very important because it was very, very slow for me to read something of Plato. I needed all the time the translation beside. So I had read like that, with the translation, the text and going from one side to the other, you see. I had read the Symposium of Plato and perhaps the Protagoras, I don't remember, but 2 or 3 dialogues, but not more than that. Now I have read a lot. Really, I can say that the amount of text that I have read on my own directly in Greek is very important. Why? Because I take pleasure in reading because now it's much easier for me to read. So I can read large amounts of text without having the translation. Or sometimes, from time to time, I have to look for a word that I don't understand. Or if there is really a very difficult sentence, so perhaps in one instance I will have to check the how other people have translated, and then I will ask myself, but I'm not sure they have really well understood well the text. You see, I mean, it's a different attitude, you know. But the thing is, you really increase your speed, your reading speed, when you are become able to speak. You increase your reading speed, and not only that, but also you see nuances in the text that someone who doesn't speak the language doesn't see. Because when you speak, you have to choose. You have to say, I am going to say this or that. No, it's better to say it like that. Okay, so when you read, suddenly you become aware that there are nuances, or you will say, oh, this is how they say that. Okay, so this is the way they have said it. So you become much more sensitive, you know? You feel the differences. It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, so that's and I can attest to that as well, just with my own experience. I this past year, I think at Hebrew University, took a class where, you know, it was just like a Greek readings class with a professor of mine, and I remember that. So we were doing like First Maccabees, and you know, I would just be riding through the town in Jerusalem on the bus, just reading First Maccabees in Greek. And that's the kind of thing I never could have done, right, if I hadn't learned to speak Greek before and really like internalize a lot of the vocabulary. You know, I wouldn't be able to just read the text like it's a text, you know, instead of read the text to decode it. And what that does, I mean, I think this is the main point, is that you can consume a lot more text that way. And in consuming more text, you actually are learning the language much quicker, right? Because if I can know every word in a sentence except one, right? Then I can learn that word, and then I can keep going, right? And I don't have to stop every other word, and the text becomes something that's really inaccessible if it's that slow. You're not reading it as a text. So that's really helpful, and I think that I can just say, from my own experience and just from talking to others, that would be the kind of distinctive, and what you said as well, that you have expectations that are met or are not met by the text, whereas if you don't really speak it, then it's hard to have really concrete expectations about how they would say certain things and how would they use the language to describe the world, because you don't really have that match between language and the world so strongly. Yeah. So I think at this point, just kind of wrapping up, shifting gears again. So we'll just have a few more questions here. So one area of contention within Greek studies is pronunciation. So I know Polis' system. So we have, in Biblingo, we have 4 pronunciation systems. One is Polis' system. Then we have Erasmian, modern, and Koine, right? Or reconstructed Koine. So can you tell us a little bit about the Polis pronunciation system? This is a hot topic within Greek studies, and it's people often tell me oh, do you speak Erasmian? And I say no, you obviously don't know the Erasmian system. But there are things about the Polis system that Kai, for example, sounds more like Erasmian, right, than it would, for example, the reconstructed Koine. K, exactly. So yeah, can you tell us, where did this system come from, and what are the distinctives about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that there are different pronunciations that are all legitimate. It depends what your focus is. So there is only one that I wouldn't use, and it's modern Greek pronunciation to read an ancient text. I understand that it is perfectly possible, for instance, in the liturgy, perfectly possible. But from the moment you become communicative, it seems to me that it is very difficult to say imis for you, plural, and imis, exactly the same thing for us, plural. That I think it's very difficult. And I don't know a single language in the world where you and us in plural are the same word. Because then you have some text of St. Paul, you cannot understand when he's playing with the you and us and you and us. So what is he saying? If I have to use it in a communicative way, I need to distinguish, So, and that's just one example, but there are many. So, and this is why today in modern Greek, you have two different words for you and us, plural. The thing is, apart from that, I think that they are all legitimate in a communicative way. I'm not saying that it's perfectly legitimate also to read ancient Greek with modern Greek pronunciation. That's perfectly possible. And this is what people in Greece do many times. They read it with their own pronunciation. There's no problem with that, as long as it is not communicative. This is my only point. And then there are many to try to find the pronunciation that you had in the times of the evangelists and to see how it sounded like. So you will use Randall pronunciation, Randall Booth pronunciation. That's perfectly legitimate. So the thing is, what we decided at Polis, and it's legitimate as other systems are legitimate. And I will tell you why we came to this solution or this decision, I would say. What makes the unity of ancient Greek is the spelling, okay? Pronunciation has changed from century to century, sometimes from half a century to the other half of century. But what has remained the same is, at least in printed text and official texts, is the spelling. So you have a unity, which is the spelling. Okay. So now I think that ancient Greek is a difficult enough language. Okay. I think it's not necessary to add more difficulties. If I say tipui instead of tipoye, I have to learn tipui, and then I have to learn how it is written. You see, which are two different things. Whereas if you read what is written, basically, or almost what is written, according to the pronunciation that we use in Polis, I'm not saying that we are exactly pronouncing all what is written, but almost. So then it becomes easier. So because we have this distinction between the perispomenos, so the how do you say that, perispomene, circumflex accent, and the acute accent, and so on. Then you have the difference between long and short vowels, at least under the accent. Then you have the difference between the diphthongs and so on, and so I is I, and E is epsilon. So there is a difference there. So it becomes easier to learn. And that pronunciation is the pronunciation of the very beginning of Koine and of classic times. So that allows you to read very close to what is written, all the text from the 5th century BC till the 10th century AD, because up till the 10th century AD, more or less, at least for literary texts, the language has a certain stability. After that, you start having changes, important changes in the 11th, the 12th century in Byzantine Greek. But for up till the 10th century AD, you have a stability in the language. So this is what I would say, because otherwise we would have to have a pronunciation for the first century AD, a pronunciation for reading Pericles. You're not going to read a text that talk about Pericles, a text from Attic text. I mean, I don't know, a text of Plato who is talking about Pericles, and you are not going to read it with the first AD pronunciation. It would be completely anachronistic. So you are not going to read with the first century AD pronunciation, a text that belongs to the 10th century AD, because that also would be anachronistic. So you could say, okay, but Polis pronunciation is also anachronistic. Yes, but then the spelling is anachronistic. So at least I have a reference, which is the spelling.
Yeah.
And then if someone really is able to read all the longs and short vowels, even when they are not under the accent, if someone is able to read also the iota subscript and so on, so that doesn't make a problem of, it's very easy, it's almost the same pronunciation. So, I mean, sometimes, many times in our classes, different pronunciations coexist. And even those who have Randall Booth pronunciation can come and study at Polis. There's no problem. I mean, we understand them. It sounds a little bit strange for some other students, but in the end, you understand them.
Well, and I think that's a great point. And just what you said at the beginning, it was that, a lot of these different systems are legitimate, right? Like the important thing is learning the language and using the system. And really, I wouldn't say that, a New Yorker knows knows English any different than a Southerner because they pronounce the vowels differently, right? But they do pronounce the vowels differently, right? And so I think that's just an important point that's kind of been lost in this whole discussion. Is it's important, right? And I think it's important for especially, like you said, learning a new language. Like, let's try to make it as like pedagogically easy as possible, right? Let's not introduce difficulties. But at the same time, we really can, our Greek, I hope, would be good enough to where we can detect those, subtle differences, and we can understand each other, right? Just like I can understand someone who is from Australia or who's from Great Britain, right?
A very good point there. I mean,
all of those things.
It's not a problem. It's just enriching us. Because when I hear someone speaking with Randall Booth pronunciation, then I have an idea of what the pronunciation was at the end of the first century AD. So that's interesting. It enriches my understanding of ancient Greek pronunciation at the end of the first century. So that's interesting. Yeah, perfectly. So, I fully agree with you.
Great. So what would you say, let's say someone wants to implement this. So let's say they've listened to this podcast and they've said, hey, I want to teach Greek, but I can't speak it. And they say, I would love at least to incorporate, the living language approach into my classroom, but, they don't know where to start. So what would you say to that person?
I would say it's important to speak, to have a command. Otherwise, how can you do it? You can try to do it on your own, but it's very difficult. Or you can try to do it just trying with the different videos that are. Each time you have more videos that are on the web. That's not enough. I would say it would be good to take a course, an intensive course at least. The Greek 1 and Greek 2. What corresponds to what we do in Polis Institute as Greek 1 and Greek 2, you could take it online. You could take it at the Polis Institute. You could take it with another institute. There are several, wherever you want. But the important thing is to take an intensive course, or else if you cannot have an intensive course, you take a course that happens twice a week. I mean, there are enough institutes now that offer some Greek courses online. So follow a Greek course online, and then start using it in your class. I mean, the same thing would be, I would say the same thing for Latin, for biblical Hebrew. Just follow a course. It's important that the person who speaks, who teaches, is able to speak. I mean, I think that's unavoidable. Otherwise, what are you going to do? I mean, if there is not a little bit of fluidity in what you say, it will be very difficult. I mean, you cannot manage when you are teaching two different things. I mean, you can do it. I was doing it at the beginning, but it was also a little bit painful for my students. But if you want to have a good class, and you have to be concentrated on pedagogy. But if you also have to be concentrated on what you are doing, so you cannot follow the two things at the same time. It's not possible. So I would say it's important to have a command of the language you are teaching. I mean, what is the very least that is expected from a teacher of a language is that teacher knows the language that she or he is teaching.
It's so interesting because you would think that would be a given, right? That if you're going to teach the language, you have to know the language. But it's actually
it's not really true. Greek for years without knowing ancient Greek,
Yeah. No, well,
just because I had a PhD, but for years I was teaching a language that I was not able to read without translating, and that I was not able to speak. So but this is what happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think the point is, I think one of our big issues is that we've kind of defined what it means to know Greek differently, right? To know Greek to some people means to know about Greek, right? And that's a different kind of knowledge. I mean, it's a legitimate knowledge, and I think it's important. And I think some people can kind of degrade that, the grammatical studies and the grammar translation method and those kinds of things. I mean, I think those are important things that still need to be developed, but it is different than being able to, describe what you did today in Greek, right? Which is...
I will tell you something. The grammatical grammar translation method is not traditional, strange as it may seem. Grammar translation method started really at full gear in the 16th century, not before. And it started for Greek and for Biblical Hebrew. We had a very interesting conference that we are about to publish, the monograph about it, on the history of the teaching of ancient Greek and Latin and Biblical Hebrew from antiquity to nowadays. So you can see how Latin has been taught till the end of, even in the 16th century, even I would say till the 18th century, largely as a living language. So grammar was taught, but once people knew to use the language, okay. First you use the language, then you learn grammar, Latin grammar. But it was not just starting with Latin grammar. You see, so classes were given in Latin. When you see all the dialogues of in the times of Erasmus that were in easy Latin, you can understand how they learned. You had something similar for Greek, especially in antiquity. In antiquity, you had Roman boys who would learn ancient Greek at home with some Greek slaves. That happened in the higher classes of society. So they had Greek slaves at home who would speak Greek with the children. And then they would go to school, and there they would learn the grammar, but they already knew the language.
Right.
And somehow you could say even in the Middle Ages, so it's a very interesting history. So you had pockets of people who spoke Greek at home in Western Europe. So in Sicily, you had Greek speakers. In the south of Italy, you had some monasteries in Venice, in Ravenna, where you had Greek monks. So you had people who really spoke Greek, and there were people learning from them. Those who didn't have Greek as a mother tongue, they would learn with them. And there were no grammars, or almost no, very, very rudimentary, very simple grammars, and very few. So it was impossible really to learn with the grammar. So you had to learn with someone who spoke, or else you had to learn with a text. So another way of learning was to take the Psalms, had the Latin text, you had the Septuagint text, and so you you would read with the text, with the text. You were reading the Psalms and looking at the translation, but you were not learning grammar as such. So the teaching of grammar started when you had these scholars who came from Constantinople and from Greece at the end of the 15th century AD to Europe, and they started teaching Greek because people wanted. Up till then there were very few people in Western Europe who really were able to read in Greek. Very, very few, apart from those in these pockets that I have mentioned. So what they did was to teach grammar. Why? But to teach grammar according to the Byzantine grammar. So to teach grammar that were intended for people who already knew the language. So they taught in Latin. They taught the grammar. And they took a text and then translated it and analyzed and parsed it and made people parse the text. So there you have the beginning of the grammar translation method. But this is an innovation, you see? And so for Greek, really, there is a myth according to which humanists would have spoken ancient Greek. So the only ones who really spoke in the Renaissance period Greek were people coming from ancient Greece, from Greece, sorry. So the scholars, or perhaps people who had spent just before the end of the independence of Greece, of the Byzantine Empire, who had spent some time in Greece, or else you had very few humanists who became able to speak. Among them, Erasmus and the circle around Aldo Manutius. There was even a project of an academy where only ancient Greek would be spoken. So they had some dinners, a bunch of scholars where they tried just to speak ancient Greek. It was very, very limited. Humanists would speak Latin, really. So and communicate in Latin, mainly, perhaps not too much in Italy, but outside Italy that was the case. But for Greek, we have to say that there has been really a hiatus. Do you say hiatus in English?
Hiatus.
Hiatus. A hiatus. There has been a hiatus. So because ancient Greek has not been really spoken, save in very, very, very small groups where you have a handful of scholars. Since I would say, since the 16th century, when you had the last Greek scholars who were able to really write in a beautiful Koine style and also speak that language. From the 16th century till now, you have had individuals here and there who were able to write in Koine Greek and to speak in Koine Greek, but by no means it has been a phenomenon as it is becoming to be now. So by no means.
Right. Yeah, and that just goes to show, how exciting, it is now that we have this growing community of speakers of, ancient Greek, and people are really interested in this. So I think as just a final wrap up question, just very practically, if someone says they want to learn to speak Greek, what sorts of materials is the Polis Institute specifically working on now, or what do they have out there that's currently available for teachers and students to really start their journey on speaking Greek and Hebrew for that matter too?
Yeah. So for Greek, we have two volumes of the Polis Method. So, which is the volume of the teacher and the volume of the student. And that covers, I would say, a third of Greek morphology, the first third. Then we are about to publish the second step. So what would be, because the first book No, the first two books cover Greek 1 and Greek 2. So the students' volume covers Greek 1 and Greek 2, and the teachers' volume covers Greek 1 and Greek 2. Then we are about to publish Greek 3. The other levels are very much advanced, but to finish, to write a method. I mean, I have 2 doctorates. It's much easier to finish a PhD than to finish a book of, a serious method for teaching languages. So this is an incredible amount of work, and it has to be tested by different teachers in order that you are sure that it works and so on. So we are about to publish the Greek 3. Then there is Hansel and Gretel in ancient Greek with some. Basically it's the level. It's a text that someone could read at the end of Greek 2, and it's the story of Hansel and Gretel in very easy Greek, and also with some helps, some illustrations on the margins to help the student understand the difficult words. Then we are working also on a new method, which is unus duo tres. So it will start first in Latin, 1, 2, 3, unus duo tres, and then it will be published also in Greek, hen diotria, very visual, so completely visual. Okay, and it follows really the language, the dynamic language development. So step by step, you are building up the language. So that's also a tool that we are working on.
Yeah, that's really helpful and really exciting. And so, we'll post a link to these materials, whatever is available for the public on our page notes. And so we'll just end with that. So that's all we have time for on this episode of the Biblical Languages podcast. Thank you, Christophe, for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of our listeners out there who have taken the time to listen to the Biblical Languages podcast, brought to you by Biblingo. We hope you enjoyed the episode.